All right, we're getting started in 1 minute here. All right, let's do it. I like starting right on time. So my name is Dan. I'm here in Nevada. I run the Success Center here. I've done the calls for Rick a few times, so hopefully you guys remember me. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about something different that I haven't talked about recently, I don't think, on these calls, and that's delivering world-class customer service. So what I'm not going to talk about is why it's important. Hopefully everyone understands why it's important from a business standpoint to deliver world-class customer service. We could talk for hours about that, but hopefully you guys understand and appreciate why delivering world-class customer service is important. So the first question, I don't know how many people are on this call. I think I only heard one or two people. But the first question is, what's more important? What's more important between sales and customer service? So this question, a lot of people think that customer service is more important because that's what we're talking about, and I always preach about how important it is. But you could make an argument that your sales ability is actually more important. And the reality is that sales and customer service both intersect each other. Good morning, guys. Just make sure to mute your phones when you jump on the call. So we're talking about delivering world-class customer service today. This is Dan here in Nevada. So the reality is that sales and customer service intersect. Okay, your sales ability begets good customer service. They can't be separated. And actually, the skills involved in both are very, very similar. Your empathy, your listening skills, your ability to ask good questions, they kind of coincide with one another, actually. So more customers, when you have more customers, you deliver better service. Okay, and a lot of agents get this backwards. A lot of agents think, well, if I have more customers, I'm busier, and then I can't deliver as good of service, and I like being hands-on, and I like doing everything, so they use that as an excuse to not grow. So I want to hear from you guys, people jumping on the call a little bit late here, which is fine. I want to hear from you about how could having more customers mean delivering better service to the customers? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Feel free to jump in.
Laura Collins.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
Any thoughts? Any thoughts on how having more customers could mean better service? Okay, so you guys are off to a slow start today. That's fine. I'll jump in here. So, and this is good, actually. I'm not surprised because a lot of people fail to really understand this or learn about it. So having less customers is actually not good for the customers. Having more customers is actually beneficial. Guys, just make sure to mute your phone. I'm getting a lot of feedback. Whoever just jumped on right now. Okay, so if you have more customers, what this means is you have more systems, you have more checklists, you have more experience, you have more negotiating experience, you have the ability to have more staff, which also allows for more bandwidth and more resources. Okay, so for example, if I have a customer who needs to see a house, a buyer or seller who wants to look at a property, I have enough staff, guys, just make sure to please mute your phones when you're jumping on the call. I have enough staff that we could show a property to any customer really at any time within reason 24 hours a day. If I was by myself and I didn't have the bandwidth of the resources to do that, well, then if a customer wants to see a house, then it's going to have to wait until whenever my schedule will allow that. I'm limited on my bandwidth. Same thing with answering calls. When you grow and you have an ability to have a staff, you have people that can answer the phone. I have someone that answers the phone anytime the phone rings. When someone calls into the office, there's always someone there to answer. If it's just me and I'm small and I don't have any bandwidth, I can't do that. So having more customers actually helps deliver better customer service. And I wish I could draw you guys a little figure here so you could see what I'm talking about, but hopefully you know what a bell curve is. Does anyone know what a bell curve is? I guess you guys wouldn't be able to describe it, but there's this bell curve when it comes to customer service. So just imagine a bell shape, okay? Now, there's going to be a minority of customers on the left and that little tip on the left side and a little tip on the right side. There's like 10% on each side. And then you have your majority of your customers in the middle, the 80% in that big bell area. Guys, just please make sure to mute your phones. So what do I mean with this bell shape? Well, 80% of your customers, the ones in the middle, are reasonable people. They get frustrated sometimes, but overall, if you do a good job, they'll be happy with you. They send you referrals if they meet someone, but they do get frustrated and there's problems that come up, right? Okay, then there's the 10% on the left, that left tip of the bell, that are just the pains in the butt, the quintessential pain in the butt customers that will always complain. They're always negative. Nothing you do is ever good enough. They'll never refer you anyone, and they're just a nightmare to work with, okay? And then there's the 10% on the right-hand side of the bell curve. Those are the customers that are just happy no matter what you do, no matter how bad you screw it up. They'll always love you. They'll refer you to all of their friends and family, just always the nicest people in the world, best customers ever to work with, okay? And then you have, again, the 80% in the middle. So where am I going with this? The idea here is that you can't change the 10% on the left and move them into the middle, or take the 80% in the middle and move them to the right. Those people are the way they are, and nothing that you do really is going to do that or change that at all, okay? So the solution here isn't to, go crazy trying to change these people. The solution is to grow your business, make the bell bigger, expand it out. If you grow the bell, then you have more of that little 10% on the right to choose from, and you could be more selective here because, again, you'll never convert that 10% to being in the middle. So the solution here is to grow. This is where sales and customer service intersect, because the more you grow your business, the more selective you can be, the more you can work with the right people. 90% of this is selection and qualifying. That's what's going to make all of your customer service easier after the fact. Okay, so what's another example of this? Let's talk about pricing. Okay, pricing a listing or working with a buyer and writing an offer that's actually competitive and not extremely low. These are the same skill set, right? Because sellers always want more, buyers always want less. So your ability to price properly, correctly on either side is a huge cornerstone for your real estate business. It affects everything with your customer service. So let me give you an example. Let's say you take a listing. Guys, please make sure to mute your phones. I'm still getting some feedback here. If you take a listing and you price it appropriately, okay, meaning not too high, what will happen is this. It'll sell faster. You'll get more offers. Your seller is going to be happier with you. Your seller is much less likely to have a cancellation. That's a huge part of customer service. The worst customer service experience really in our business is, with a listing anyway, is when a buyer cancels. That's literally the worst thing that could happen to your seller. It's extremely frustrating. They lose confidence in you. It has a significant impact on them financially and otherwise and emotionally. It's just a nightmare, right? Everyone has had that experience. So if you have a listing that's priced more aggressively, you are way less likely to have a cancellation. And I think the reasons might be obvious, but if the buyer knows they're getting a deal, they're just less likely to back out. If they feel like they're overpaying, they're more likely to back out. I've tracked this in my own business, and the numbers are astounding with how much of a dichotomy there is here. So way less likely to have a cancellation, way less likely to have a low appraisal come in, obviously, if it's priced right. There's way less negotiation with the repair response on the inspection, because if the listing is priced right and it's aggressive, then the buyers know that, and they don't typically ask for much. They don't nitpick the inspection. If the buyers know they're overpaying or paying a really high price, you guys all know what they're going to do. They're going to ask for every little thing to be fixed. And even if they still ask for that, if the listing's priced right, you can say no because you have other options. There's other offers on the table, or at least you could get other offers. So your sales ability intersects every single part of the service experience here. There's even more. If it's priced more aggressively, they move on their own time frame. They brag to you about all their friends and family about how fast their home sold. You're way more likely to get referrals. You're way more likely to get sign calls or internet leads on better priced listings. I've noticed that all of the deals that I've double-ended, literally every deal that I've represented both the buyer and the seller, because I got a sign call or internet lead from that listing, those all were priced aggressively. I've never gotten good buyer leads, or a lot of buyer leads, I should say, out of listings that were overpriced. Does anyone else notice that? The ones that are overpriced just seem to kind of sit. You don't really get any activity on it because there's no interest. The more aggressively it's priced, that's the best sales tool you could possibly have. Again, guys, there's someone who has their phone not muted. It's very tough to hear because I'm getting some feedback. Just make sure to mute your phone. Okay, so pricing affects your ability to deliver service the entire way through the transaction. Now, here's another question. We're talking about delivering world-class service. I'm going to really challenge your guys' thinking and mindset here. So if you charge a higher commission, you are more likely to deliver better customer service. Can anyone tell me why they think that might be true?
I guess because you want to earn your commission. You want to demonstrate why they should pay you that amount.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Thank you. The opposite would also be true, right? So it might be easier to think about it this way. If you charge less commission, subconsciously or consciously, I would think that you would be less motivated to service someone. Now, I know everyone here is going to say, well, no, I treat them all the same. Or you should attempt to do that. You should kick the ball the same every single time, the way they say. But if you are charging someone less than you should, you are less motivated and you just have less resources to service that customer. That's the reality, right? If you're charging more, you feel like I'm going to do everything in my freaking power to make sure this customer is wowed and they have a wow experience with me. So when you and also if you're taking a listing and you're offering less commission to the buyer's agent, there's less incentive to show the property. Then we go back to that pricing issue from before. So when you charge more, that's just a little side note that I like since I love talking about getting a good solid commission. It actually improves the service. Now, here's another point. Unqualified buyers or unqualified sellers will never be happy with your service. Okay, we're going to talk about the fundamentals and I'm going to talk about some tips and actually how to deliver better service. And qualifying is a huge part of it because an unqualified seller who's not motivated to move or an unqualified buyer who's not motivated to buy and just wants to write lowball offers on every house they see, they'll never be happy with you. You can't take that person and make it into a good service by just talking to them more, putting more effort in. It won't happen because the qualifications have to be there. So one of the fundamental aspects of this, again, goes back to your sales skill and your ability to qualify customers. Okay, so let's talk about some pragmatic things. How do we actually do this? After, let's say you improved your sales skill to the best it could possibly be, which I don't think is the case, but what could you do? So there's a misconception that delivering good customer service means you don't have any problems in your real estate transaction. If I deliver good service, that means there's no problems. There's always going to be problems. Literally, there will always be a problem almost in every single real estate transaction. You guys know this. I think there's over like 26 people that interact on one file when it comes to a real estate transaction. If not you, someone else is going to screw something up. So what you have to understand here is it's not your ability to not have problems. It's how you respond to problems. And it's not even really what you do or what you say to customers that matters. It's really how you sound and how you make them feel. Okay, so when it comes to service, the huge mistake that I see agents making is that there's a lack of focus on the fundamentals, and then they try and make up for it by doing these extra fancy things with these fancy marketing materials, and they print these expensive flyers, and they buy their clients gifts, and they do all this stuff afterwards because they feel guilty and because they didn't do the right things earlier. The fundamentals of good service are this: saying thank you often, being grateful for your customers, telling them that when you talk to them, having good energy and enthusiasm when you speak to them, how you sound when you speak to them. You could completely screw everything up in a real estate deal, but if you sound good and you are grateful and you say thank you and you show them that you care, honestly, in most cases, they're still going to feel like you delivered good service by the time the trend on. Consistent and proactive communication, another fundamental. Now, we're going to talk about this because It's a buzzword. Everyone likes saying, yeah, communicate, but what does that mean, and how does that actually play out is a different question. Okay, so those are the fundamentals of actually delivering good service. So again, what you say is not as important as how you make the customer feel. I used to do my customer service updates every day, and I would kind of just run through my files. Like I would just call or talk to each customer, and it was just like checking a checklist. And then I realized that that wasn't working very well, because the customers could feel that, right? They could feel that I was just kind of running through and treating them like numbers. How you make them feel is very important. Okay, so let's talk about communication. We talked about a few tips and other things, but let's talk about communication. If a customer, a buyer, or a seller ever calls you or texts you or emails you and asks the question, hey, Dan, what's going on? I haven't heard from you. That, in my opinion, is a service failure, or at least that's how I think I've said this on these calls before. I consider that a service failure. That should never really happen. Within reason, that should never really happen. Okay, so you might say, well, Dan, that's ridiculous. I mean, people are always going to be wondering at some point. Well, if you're communicating proactively enough, and I say aggressively, I think you should be communicating aggressively with your customers. They're paying you a lot of money. You should be willing to do that. They should never really be wondering, sitting there steeping and stewing about what's going on to the point where they actually have to reach out to you. If they're reaching out to you, that means they've been already thinking about it for a while. So you should be communicating, or you should have staff that's communicating enough, even if there's literally nothing going on, so that they know that and they're not starting to steep and wonder about what the issue is. 2 times when this is really important are when you write offers for a buyer, or when you are waiting on an offer to get accepted or on a listing, or when you first take a listing. Okay, so let's say you wrote an offer for a buyer. You and your buyer write this offer. They're really excited. You present it to the listing agent. Listing agent says, okay, my seller's out of town. We'll have an answer for you in the next 48 hours or so. Okay, and you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to tell the buyer what's going on. So you tell them, okay, so we're going to have an answer in the next 48 hours. As soon as I hear, I'll let you know. You think your job's done, right? You told your buyer what's going to happen, so you don't feel the need to communicate anymore. 24 hours later, or 12 hours later, or 3 hours later, you get a text or a call from your buyer saying what? Hey, have you heard on that offer yet? Have you heard? Why are they doing this? Because they're excited. They're excited. This is the highest emotional point of a transaction for a buyer. This is when they're most excited. You have to understand this emotional dynamic that's taking place right now. And even if you know that it might take 24 to 48 hours to hear from the listing agent, I would still proactively communicate with your buyer during this window. It's an extremely emotionally sensitive time for them. I would still let them know, probably at most every 12 hours. Hey, just so you know, I haven't heard from the listing agent yet. As soon as I get a response, I'll let you know. I'm excited to help you guys find a great house. If you have any questions, please let me know. That's what separates good service from world-class service. And even better, you could ask the listing agent for an update during those windows as well. I know it might be considered bugging or harassing, but hey, you're working for the buyer here. You're not working for the listing agent. Well, technically you are, but your main customer here is the buyer. So I wouldn't be worried about that. And the same thing when you take a listing. If you take a listing, the moment that contract is signed is the highest emotional state that seller will be in. That's when they're most excited, as excited as you can be about selling a house. Selling a house is not really a fun process, right? But as excited as you could possibly be about it is when the seller inks the contract, the listing contract. So if you take a listing and you tell them, okay, well, yeah, I'll be in touch in a few days, and then 48 hours goes by and they don't hear from you, that's the worst possible thing that could happen. The worst thing. You need to be paying very, very, very close attention to your communication in those 2 windows, specifically when their emotional state's the highest, if that makes sense. And I would be very proactive in that. So going hand in hand with that is expectations. You have to be, I would argue, almost militant about setting expectations with customers. What causes disappointments and frustrations is not really the lack of performance or the outcome. It's the lack of expectation about what's going to happen, because ultimately we all know there's a lot of things we can't control in a real estate transaction. If I'm representing a seller and a buyer backs out because they're flaky or because they end up getting a different job transfer, I can't control that. But what can I do? I can set expectations in the beginning, which makes it less problematic. So here's a concrete example of this. What you should do anytime you communicate with a customer, you should tell them what the next steps are and exactly when they will happen by. Otherwise, if you don't do this, the customer will do it in their own head. They'll set their own expectations, which may or may not be the same as your expectations. I learned this from a great agent, Josh Barker in California. You have to, if you're not setting the expectations, they'll do it in their own head, and it'll probably not be the same as what you thought. So when I get a listing signed, before I leave the house, usually as I'm walking out of the house, I remind them multiple times, okay, John, the next step is that my assistant, Crystal, will reach out to you. She's going to call you before the end of the day today, and she's going to schedule the pictures. Okay, the pictures will be taken. Today is Friday. Typically, if we can get someone out there tomorrow, if at the very latest Sunday, that will allow us to have the property on the market Monday, at the latest Tuesday. And with those time frames, I'm making them longer than they might necessarily be in reality, because I want to underpromise and overdeliver, right? That's a pretty common thing that we all understand. So you have to get into this discipline about always setting expectations every single time you talk to a customer, what will happen next, and specifically when it will happen at the latest. Set an aggressive, or not an aggressive, a longer deadline than you think might be necessary. This way you're already meeting commitments, you're making good on your promises every step of the way with the customers. That's what makes service good, and that's what holds things together. Okay, so one example of this, I had a listing recently, and there was an extension, a long extension. The loan was done, everything was completed with it, but for some reason the buyers just couldn't close. They were waiting for money to come in. They couldn't close for an additional month. And the sellers were okay with this in this case. I told them, and they agreed to it. So I told them, as we finalized the loan, I told them, hey, so everything's done. We just can't close till next month. So we're kind of in a holding pattern for now. So you won't hear from me, but there's nothing really changing. So just wanted to let you know of that. So I thought I was doing the right thing in setting expectations. 2 weeks later, guess what happened? Sellers text me, hey, Dan, just wanted an update. What's going on? So there's a service failure, right? I thought I did the right thing, but even when you set expectations, you should still, I would argue, it should still never really go later than, I would say, a week without communicating with your buyers and sellers. Even if you think there's nothing going on, the client doesn't necessarily know that. They don't necessarily know that. A lot of times they're wondering, okay? So last thing I'll talk about, and we'll wrap up, affiliates and vendors, they need to be world class as well in their service. Arguably, they're more important than what we do. So if I'm working with a buyer, the buyer will probably spend more FaceTime or talk time with the lender than they will with me, because there's just more volume of stuff to be done there. There's more phone calls involved, right? Especially if it's tricky. Maybe not if it's not tricky, but if it's tricky. So if your lender screws it up, who does that reflect poorly on? All of us, especially if we recommended them. Even if you didn't recommend them, when the buyers look back on this transaction, they are going to associate you with that lender, even if you didn't recommend them. So it's extremely important that you choose vendors who are world-class in what they do, vet them very carefully. And I would argue that if you shouldn't recommend the cheapest vendor for anything. We'd rather have a customer turn down a vendor because they're too expensive than use one that's cheap and get it screwed up, right? The same thing with us and how we run our business. So be very careful with that. The last thing, here's a little interesting topic, buying gifts for customers. As some people know, I'm not a huge fan of it. Everyone has a different opinion on this. And a lot of people actually criticize me because I typically don't go to my closings for my customers because personally I don't think it's necessary. And I don't buy my customers gifts. And I get a lot of flack for that. And everyone has their own opinion. I appreciate it and I respect it. But my argument in this is that if a customer gets serviced to the best of my ability, everything goes perfectly, all the expectations are hit, their listing sells right away, they're so happy about everything, they're bragging about me to friends and family, it couldn't be any better throughout the entire transaction. They're not really expecting a gift at the end. You've already delivered them a gift with your service. That's what the gift should be. My argument here is that a lot of agents, there's a lack of focus on those fundamentals we talked about. They're not saying thank you. They're not being grateful. They don't have good sales skills. They're not getting the basic job done of getting the property sold or finding a buyer property that they want. And there's not a good energy and enthusiasm when they talk to their customers. There's not consistent and proactive communication. There's not expectations being set. The customer's constantly disappointed. You're constantly not hitting your promises that you're making to your customer. And then, so what do? Then you feel guilty that you're not going to the closing, right? Because you feel like you have to do something to earn that check that you just charged to this person or whoever's buying the property. So you go to the closing, and then you feel even more guilty, so you buy the customer a gift after. That's the reason why I don't do it. Now, if you're going to do everything right and you want to apply everything that you've learned on this call and then go to your closings and buy your clients gifts, by all means, go at it. I would say do it. But just don't forget that will never make up for the lack of fundamentals. That will never make up for the basic customer service principles that we talked about. So I would try and maintain a good focus on that. All right. That's it for today. Go deliver good service, make some sales. Thank you guys for joining on the call today. Again, this is Dan here in Vegas, and I will see you on the next one.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Have a good one.